We got a buddy in front of us here. Give us your name, rank, and branch of service.
Gerald Thomas, Specialist 4, United States Army.
All right. What was your expertise, Gerald?
I was a 16 Romeo, short-range air defense artillery.
Okay. Delve into that a little bit. You were telling us before we got on camera here a little bit about the piece of equipment that you worked on and with and those type of things. Tell us a little bit about the Vulcan.
It was a Vulcan short-range air defense artillery. It was a 20-millimeter cannon, Gatling gun, mounted on a armored personnel carrier, Vietnam era.
Okay, but you weren't in the Vietnam era, technically.
No, I was not. I served during the Cold War.
Okay, and what years would that be, Gerald?
From 1982 to 1985.
All right, right in the sweet spot of the Cold War.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, no doubt about that. Where were you originally stationed? Okay.
Went to Fort Bliss, Texas for basic training as a 19-year-old. Scared to death, not knowing what to expect, and had a really good experience overall.
Let me, before we go further, because I know there's a lot to go further with here, why did you go in the Army in the first place?
Well, I graduated in 1981, so it was about a year after I graduated. When I graduated, I was promoted to an assistant manager to Kentucky Fried Chicken, and they put me in a store in Detroit.
Okay.
And things aren't much different than what they were today than they were back then, when we had kids that didn't want to come into work, and so I was stuck doing their job and then closing the store at night. And believe it or not, I quit to join the military because I thought the military would be much easier than being a manager at a fast food restaurant.
Okay, so let's go back to Fort Bliss.
Yes, Fort Bliss.
Okay, what was it like at Fort Bliss in that time frame?
It was absolutely different. You're treated really nicely when you're in front of your recruiter and they're having you sign the paperwork and everything. But when you take the flight and you board the bus and you enter the camp and you get off that bus, it's a different experience. You know, you got a drill sergeants, they're yelling at you, "I'm your mother, I'm your father, I'm your worst nightmare." And once I figured out it was just a game, it was a head game, it was a test. Once you figure that out, then everything from that point on is just smooth sailing.
How long did it take you to figure it out?
It took me probably about my 5th week. I think basic training at that time was 13 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Okay. Tough physically?
Very tough physically, and you always have your occasional knucklehead that messes it up for everyone. You know, one person could be responsible for 50 push-ups. Right. For the whole squad.
Now, let's talk about, because I think after Fort Bliss, you're expecting to go one place and you end up taking a little bit of a detour.
Yes. Toward the end of basic training, I got called into the commander's office, and I was scared to death. I was like, what did I do to be called to the commander's office? So I'm standing there shaking at attention, and he's sitting at the desk and he's shuffling through these papers. And he looks up to me and he says, "Private Thomas, your orders have changed. You're going to Korea." And that's exactly how he said it. And I about passed out on the floor. I didn't know anything about Korea except two things: that they technically were still at war, which we still are today, and it was not Fort Stewart, Georgia, where I was supposed to be going.
Right.
Yeah, that was a bit of a shock.
Now, had you gone to Georgia, what was that going to be? Was that going to be an extension of more training or whatever, or what?
Well, it would be a permanent duty station, my first permanent duty station.
Okay.
And I can't remember, I think that was the 3rd Army Division, mechanized down there in Fort Stewart, Georgia.
Okay.
So I was anticipating it because it was closer to home. I had a girlfriend at the time who later became my wife, and I just thought I would be able to commute easier back home to Detroit.
Right.
And that wasn't the case.
Now, Korea, okay. What are you thinking on the way over? What are you thinking when you hit the ground? Tell us about it.
From San Francisco, it's about a 15-hour flight, and I'm scared. I'm 19 years old. I'm going to another country that's technically still at war, and fresh out of basic training. And so we're over the ocean, and I had a come to Jesus moment. I was thinking to myself, you better get right. You know, you've trained for this. And I made in my mind that I was going to be the best 16 Romeo that I could be in Korea, because I had no other choice, you know. So when I got there, I started getting these correspondence courses from the States, and I learned things about the Vulcan that I wasn't taught in basic training in AIT. And I became really proficient with the Vulcan in my training. And we have this annual contest, they called it Sea Range at the time, where different batteries competed to win Sea Range. It consisted of drills on how you would prepare to go to war with your piece of equipment, and live fire exercises. I was a senior gunner at that time, and I shot down 4 drones over the sea. And the contest at the time was that you could win an Army Accommodation Medal if you won Sea Range. And then the Army frowned on that, and they stopped doing that because they said you shouldn't get an Army Accommodation Medal for just doing your job.
Gotcha.
And so after Sea Range, we were perfect. We had no demerits in our performance, and we thought we were going to win. And we left there, and we didn't hear any word that we had won. We were really disappointed. And about a couple of weeks later, we found out that we won, that we had won Sea Range, and we were really, really excited.
And do they end up? How do they end up announcing that? How do they do that?
Well, we were. I think it was at formation. The commander had recognized us, and that we had won Sea Range.
Wow, that's fantastic. You brought a couple of things with you there. Can you hold them up for us and explain what's going on with each?
Okay.
Because I know one's directly related to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I believe.
Well, this is my Army Achievement Medal that I ended up being awarded.
Okay.
Not in Korea, but afterwards.
Gotcha. Okay.
After I had already ETS'd, we were stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado at the time. And it was about a couple weeks later, and I got called up in front of formation, oblivious of what for.
Last time you were oblivious, you ended up in Korea.
I ended up in Korea, I know. So they were reading this for meritorious service as an assistant gunner, senior gunner, and squad leader on the self-propelled Vulcan air defense system, that I was awarded this Army Achievement Medal.
Wow, fantastic.
And everything just came full circle at that point. I was in this plane at 34,000 feet or whatever it was, contemplating that I had to be the best that I could be.
Right.
And this was the culmination of that.
Wow. What about the others that you brought off?
The other one was a certificate of achievement from the Department of the Army, because I was the honor graduate in AIT. AIT is your formal training for your MOS.
Right.
So
and
that
you,
was a great
you ranked
achievement.
very high in your class.
Yes, I was an honor graduate. I think I graduated in the top 10 of my class.
Okay.
At AIT.
And what's the last one there?
Oh, this was probably my toughest moment in the service. This is a certificate of completion of the primary non-commissioned officer school. It's called PNOC. I think it's something different now. I think it's called something different now.
Okay.
That's where they train you to be a commissioned officer, a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant.
Okay.
And it was a year and a half after I had already been in the service. It was basic training all over again.
You had to reach deep, didn't you?
I was I was back on the plane over the ocean again, having a come to Jesus moment. It was an amazing experience, though. It's compass training, map training,
Right.
and teaching you how to be a leader. And it was a great experience for me, and it shaped my life even to this day.
Do you, when it comes to leadership, were you a natural leader? Do you, in retrospect, do you feel like you had some of those traits in you the whole time, and the Army just brought them out through these things, or did they basically teach you from the bootstraps up? What's your take?
Yeah, it was basically from the bootstraps up,
Okay.
because I didn't look at myself as being a leader
Okay.
at all. The Army has instilled a lot of values in myself, and it does a lot of people, like loyalty. Our motto in the 4th Infantry Division was steadfast and loyal. It taught me patience, and I really value that.
How much, let's go back to Korea now. How much different was Korea then to now? I mean, you've got a different, the son of the leader when you were there in North Korea. Describe what it felt like to be, what were you, 25 miles from the demilitarized zone?
Yeah, 25 miles from the DMZ, well within artillery range.
Of one of the biggest armies out there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had about 40,000 American troops stationed in Korea at the time. I think it's probably about the same nowadays. When we were on alert, we slept in our uniforms with our boots next to the bed. It was considered, and still is probably, a hardship tour. Even if you were married and had a family, where I was stationed, you couldn't have them with you.
Really? Okay.
And after about 6 months, you can apply to go down south, and they called it, I think it was like a hardship, or it was so that you could relieve yourself of the stresses of being up north. So I had an opportunity to go down to Seoul, and I saw a supermarket. For the first time in 6 months, I saw American children, and I actually got choked up. Soldiers can drive down there. I had an opportunity also to go to rappelling on, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Jeju Island.
Okay.
Down there. So it was really nice to get a break, to go down south and relax, and because it can be stressful up
I was
north.
going to say, yeah, when your fingers right on the button for long periods of time, you're sleeping in your uniform next to your boots.
Yeah.
You need to get away.
Yeah, our mission up there was to protect the division command post up there. So we were first to fight. When the artillery started coming over and the planes started coming over, our job was to be able to identify them and shoot them down. So our job was to be able to identify more than 100 combat aircraft and memorize them by sight, because we didn't have any computers to identify them. So we had to identify them by sight. So the training was really intense. We had playing cards with the combat aircraft on them, the MiGs and the helicopters. So we had to be able to identify friend and foe.
It's about as close to war as you could probably imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
I don't want to take anything away from anyone who's been in combat.
Right. But you were right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Where do you go after Korea? Because that's where this gets interesting vis-a-vis what we're seeing today.
Yes. I was stationed after Korea at Fort Carson, Colorado, the 4th Infantry Division. So the training was a little bit different, in the States than it was. And we had an opportunity to travel to Europe for Reforger. It was the return of forces to Europe. And that was during the reign of the Soviet Union. So our job was to go there and train with NATO troops to defend Europe against the Soviet invasion.
And what we're seeing now play out with Russia in the Ukraine is essentially what you were training for a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. The mission today is the same as the mission back then, and that is to provide a buffer.
What, when it comes to working with NATO forces, you're looking at a lot of countries that may be on the same page, but are all talking different languages, things like that. How difficult is that? How do you mesh together like that?
You know, it was really, really interesting. We worked together as a unit. They're not much different than what we are. We're all young people, you know, and we had the same mission. So we worked together really, really well.
Any real sticky points when it came to being deployed in Europe? Did you ever feel like the Soviet Union at that time was on the precipice of pulling something like they've done in Ukraine?
Oh no! At that time, there weren't very many, you know, very high tensions or anything like that.
And I know with Ronald Reagan in office at that time, it was headed in the other direction with Mikhail Gorbachev and things.
Yes.
Eventually, it would go for the good before the pendulum swung back. Let's talk about, you know, I got to ask you this. For somebody so accomplished in the Army, why'd you get out?
When I got back to the States, it just didn't feel like it did in Korea. To me, it didn't feel that way. And I had gotten married when I came home. I really wanted to go back overseas again, but my priorities had changed.
Okay, alrighty, okay, very good. Now, all of that, quite a story, Gerald. Toughest situation versus your favorite takeaway from your time in the armed service. Where was your toughest?
Well, I would have to go back to PNOC, Primary Non-Commissioned Officer School, after having been in the Army for a year and a half, and being dealt with, you know, that adversity.
Yeah,
and overcoming it.
Yeah, it's the old, they strip you down before they put you back up. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. Alrighty, so that had to be very, very difficult training. What about your favorite takeaway?
My favorite takeaway is just being grateful for what we have here, because I saw a lot of situations where people, they really have a tough time. Their living conditions are nothing like what we have here. They're, it's in point, some of the villages in Korea, they're living in huts, and I don't know if that's still the same today, but it made me really appreciate what we have here in America, and just to be born as an American and living here makes me really, really appreciate it.
What about, we're right around Veterans Day. When Veterans Day comes up every year on the 11th of November, what do you think about?
I think about how proud I was to serve. I have this story about how I was shopping at Home Depot and with my granddaughter, and I pulled out my ID to get the 10% discount, and the lady at the checkout thanked me for my service. And when we were leaving, my granddaughter asked me, she goes, "Papa, how can people thank you for your service?" I said, well, people are thankful that, you know, soldiers and sailors have stepped up to defend what we have here. And I said, back in the day, people didn't thank me for my service because it was not too long after the Vietnam era. So I said, it's strange to me still. I said, but I do appreciate it.
Well, there's no better way to finish than with what you just said. Thank you for your service, Gerald.
Thank you.
Interesting story.
Thank you.